What's up, film fans? In this video, I'm going to give you 6 tips to help you better analyze movies. And if you stick around to the end, I might give you a 7th one for free. What's that? The whole thing's free. The whole thing's free. But if you stick around to the end, I'll give you a 7th one. There are a lot of reasons why you might want to analyze a movie. Maybe you've got a paper due soon and you've got to choose a question that one of your professors has given you, or maybe you're starting a film blog, or you just got a job at a local newspaper or a national magazine and you kind of want to up your writing game. Or maybe you just love movies and you want to know a little bit more about how they do what they do to you. This video can help you with all of that. There's a lot of angles to come at a movie from. Maybe you want to write a feminist analysis of a film, or you want to do a generic study where you write about whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie, or no, whether Star Wars is a Western or something like that, right? And you're going to analyze the generic conventions of the film and talk about how this particular film fits into a tradition or bucks a tradition and so on. This video is not about that. If you're watching this, I presume you've already got an angle into the film. You've got a kind of argument that you want to make about the film, but what you want to do now is break it down. And that can be difficult sometimes because films like to direct us. They like to direct our attention. They like to direct our experience. They like to direct the way we interact with and engage with the narrative flow. And this is true of Hollywood films, this is true of documentaries, this is true of foreign films, art films, surrealist films, whatever it is. The film has been shot, edited, performed, color corrected in precise ways to direct your experience of watching that film. And the film has a beginning, the film has an end, and from that beginning to the end, you are engaged with the process of watching the film unfold. And they do this in a lot of ways. They raise questions. Did he do it? Are they going to get together? Is she a good guy or a bad guy? They introduce themes, and you want to see how that theme develops or whether it develops. Does this narrative pay off? Does this character development work with the narrative? And so on. So while you're watching a film, while you're engaged with the film, you might be thinking, are they going to get together? But your brain is also engaged in other questions of trying to figure out what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, what could happen or what couldn't happen. And part of the pleasure of watching the film is the way those questions are answered, the way that the issues the film raises are resolved. So when you get to the film, you go, yes, for whatever reason. Maybe it answered the question exactly how you thought. That's a good payoff. Maybe it answered the question in a way that you didn't expect, but that works. And you think back and go, oh, of course. But all along the way, the film is directing that experience for you. And if you want to analyze the film better, you kind of want to break out of that narrative flow. You kind of want to get off the ride and look at it from the outside. Look at the mechanics of it. See how it works so you can better understand what it's doing to you. So I'm going to give you 6 tips to help you do that. And just before I get into them, one thing to keep in mind. When you're doing film analysis, you're often asking yourself a question or asking the film a question, what's happening? You might be asking what's happening about the performance. What are they doing? Why are they moving that way? You might be asking what's happening in terms of cinematography. Why is this a 2-shot? Why is it shot reverse shot? Why is the camera moving? Why is the camera not moving? And so on. The same with editing, the same with production design, the same with special effects, etc. My advice to you would be, while you're asking yourself what's happening, also ask yourself a couple other questions. Why is this happening? What does this mean? Because it's great to be able to analyze a wide shot, 2-shot, shot reverse shot and explain clearly that that's what's happening. But also, why is that happening at this point in the film? What does it mean? It's great to be able to recognize jump cuts or steady cam shots. But you also have to ask, why is that happening at this point in the film? And what does it mean? Or even if we don't want to say, what does it mean? What is its potential for meaning? So as I go through these steps, and as you get to your film and you start to analyze it, keep those questions in mind. All right, here we go. Number 1, this is an obvious one, but an important one. Watch the film again. tell my students this all the time. Every film that's worth talking about, which I think is just about every film, rewards rewatching. You watch the first time because you want to get on that ride I was just talking about. You want to experience that rush. Or if it's a bad film, or some of you hate watching films, so you might want to enjoy the rush of how bad the film is. Whatever it is, on your initial viewing, you want to have that experience of the film. But that's not going to allow you always to see what's going on. And even when you get really good at film analysis, even when you're sort of Jedi level, you can pick it apart on first viewing, there are things you're going to miss because you get caught up in the narrative, in the characters, in the themes, in the beauty of it. Watch it again. Make sure you watch the whole thing with your questions in mind before you get to writing any analysis or anything like that. Number 2, watch the film or the scenes that you're writing about with no sound. Now, sound is an incredibly important part of the film. It's much more important probably than you're aware of. Sound is directing your attention. The score is directing your emotions. In horror films, sounds, scores, songs can create tension, can create fear, can create scares. Sound's very important, but it's also part of that direction that the film's doing. So if you can remove that element, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to focus on things that are happening on screen without the effect that sound brings to the film. Here's a short scene from the film Wendy and Lucy. It's very simple. Michelle Williams' Wendy gets caught shoplifting and she gets brought into that back office, maybe some of you are familiar with, and interrogated. And I'm just going to play a second of it without the sound and then I'll talk over it a little bit. So there's a couple things you might notice here that you wouldn't notice with the sound on. For example, it very rarely cuts to Andy, the shop boy who caught her shoplifting. We get a lot of reaction shots of Wendy and the store manager, a lot of reaction shots in general. So that might be something you might think about. Other things that you might notice that you wouldn't, because it's a very tense and dramatic situation. This is the sort of first big conflict in the film. It's Wendy getting arrested here that's going to lead her to losing Lucy, her dog, which becomes the sort of central plot of the whole movie. So this is quite a tense scene. How do the camera angles add to that tension? How does the editing add to that tension? And these are things that you might notice better with the sound off. Vice versa to the previous tip, watch it with headphones so you can listen very closely, especially if you're doing some kind of sound analysis, sound editing, sound design, or whatever it might be, if you're analyzing the score or the soundtrack. But even if you're just doing film analysis that isn't centered on sound, listen with headphones, especially if you don't have some sort of home surround sound system that does with the sound what the filmmakers intended. If you can listen with headphones, you can do that even if you're watching on your phone or your laptop or whatever it might be. The sound is present right there in your ears and in your head. You can hear stereo, you can hear panning, you can hear sound effects, and it will help you to understand the role that sound is playing in the direction of your attention, right? It'll be more present right there in your ears. What is the score doing? Oh, it's making me feel scared. It's making me feel calm. It's making me feel sad. It's so obvious now. It's right in my ears. So watch it in black and white. Now, obviously, a lot of films are in black and whites, but if it's a color film, and if you have the means to do so on your computer or on your television, watch it in black and white. A lot of the way that our attention is directed on screen is through the use of color, through the use of light, through the use of the relationship between color and light. And it'll tell us where to look and what to pay attention to. But there's a whole frame on this film, and the frame is moving or we're cutting from one to another. And there's lots of things that may or may not be happening in that frame. For example, if you go back to the Wendy and Lucy clip, that calendar with the American flag, I think that's a lovely little moment. Some of you probably noticed. And I notice it more with the sound off, but you might also notice it in black and white. A great example of this, and I'll put a link in the description, came a few years ago when the filmmaker Steven Soderberg put the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark into black and white. He also took out all the sound and put in a score of his own, so in a way this is kind of a combination of tip 1 and tip 3. The reason Soderberg did this was because he believes Raiders of the Lost Ark is a really excellent example of how to use the film frame. How to block, how to stage, how to move within the frame, how to move the frame itself. When you watch a color film in black and white, it helps you refocus your attention on different parts of the frame. So if you're doing an analysis, watch the scene or watch the film in black and white. Tip number 5, watch the film backwards. I don't mean in reverse motion like one of those old silent movies where the guy gets up after he's fallen down, but watch the climax, then the penultimate scene, then the scene prior to that, and so on. Or if you're writing about a particular scene, watch the 2 or 3 scenes before it in reverse order. This can be a really effective way of breaking down how the narrative, but also how the visual flow of the film is working. You're looking at a scene, you're paying attention to it, you watch the previous scene afterwards, and you notice that that scene set up the things that are going to happen in the scene you're analyzing. And sometimes the setup is not directly linked, so it's not a visual link between an image in this scene and an image in that scene, or a dialogue link between something a character says in this scene and something a character says in that scene. Sometimes it mixes them. In a previous video on the film In the Heat of the Night, I talked a lot about this scene when Mr. Endicott and Virgil have this confrontation where they end up slapping each other. It's a great scene in the film. It's a great scene from Hollywood history. And I also talked about some of the scenes that lead up to it. But if you look at them in reverse order, you notice something more clearly about how some of those scenes, including some very brief ones, prepare you for that confrontational sequence. So if we watch the confrontational sequence, then we go back to the previous scene where Virgil and Gillespie are in the car.
None of that for you, huh, Virgil?
And Gillespie makes his cutting remark about how Virgil's never going to be out picking cotton. This remark creates an unsteadiness, at least psychologically, and you could see it on Poitier's face before he gets to the meeting with Endicott. Back it up a little more, and we get the subject of what Gillespie's talking about. African Americans in the South in the 1960s picking cotton. And that image has so much historical resonance, and it's laden with so much pain and so much anguish. Those scenes of black people picking cotton prepare us for the cutting nature of Guthrie's remark. Go back before that, and we get that cut to the cotton thresher. And I said in the video on In the Heat of the Night, that cut creates a tension around violence. And go back to that one scene before, and we get Guthrie in shock that Virgil wants to go up and talk to Endicott. So all of that stuff is clear when you watch it forward, but if you watch it backwards, the nature of the relationship between the dialogue, the visual, the editing comes into starker clarity. Finally, if you can, try to watch sequences side by side. Now, you might have some editing software that lets you put 2 sequences together in a split screen, and you can watch them like that. Or you might have to set up 2 laptops, or your laptop and a television, or so on. And this can apply to a lot of different analytical situations. A few years ago, film scholar Liz Greene created a fascinating video essay with a split screen of the opening sequences of David Lynch's The Elephant Man and Blue Velvet. I'll put a link to that in the description. You wouldn't think there would be a lot in common between these 2 scenes. Black and white film set in Victorian England, vibrantly color film set in suburban America in the 80s. But when you look at them in split screen, you start to notice resonances between the 2 that might tell you a little something about filmmaker David Lynch's approach to movie making, at least at that stage in his career. So if you can, look at 2 pieces of film side by side. You can do a lot of these together. For example, you could put 2 scenes in black and white, look at them next to each other. You can look at two scenes next to each other with no sound. You can put two scenes in black and white with no sound. You can put a scene in black and white and watch it backwards, and so on. So you don't have to do these in isolation, but any of these tips will help you to break out of that narrative flow and to better understand what's happening in the film that you're watching. And remember to ask those other questions, not just what's happening, but why is it happening and what does it mean? Here's tip number 7, and it's a little bit different from the others, and that's why I kind of am tacking it on here at the end. One great way to get to know a film better is to read the script. Now this can be difficult. Most film scripts aren't published, and a lot of the scripts you find online are incomplete, or you don't know where in the process of production that script comes from. You might go online and find an early draft of George Lucas's script for Star Wars, which is very different from what the film became. Oftentimes you'll find a script that's in the process of production, so it might be a first draft, second draft, third draft, and there'll be significant differences between the script and the film. And sometimes you'll find the so-called shooting script, which will be quite close to the film. But what reading the script does is kind of the opposite of a lot of what I've been talking about, is it allows you to remove the visual information and to think about the story narratively. It also raises questions about how the film was edited. You might see two scenes in a script that are filmed and presented on screen exactly as they are in the script, but in reverse order, or separated by 2 or 3 other scenes. This is another time to ask those questions. Why? Why did they choose to do that? You might not have an answer, but just thinking about it might give you insight into the process of the filmmaking, and also insight into what the filmmakers were doing to try to create that narrative flow. They cut this scene, they changed that scene, they added some dialogue, they cut this dialogue, and so on. So reading the script after you've read the film, or in hand while you're doing your second watch, can also be a very beneficial process to helping you better analyze a movie. All right, that's it. I hope you find some of those tips helpful. I guarantee that if you do any of those things, even if you have time, you've got a deadline tomorrow morning, and you've only got time to watch one scene in black and white with the sound off, your analysis will benefit from doing that. If you give it a try, let me know how it goes in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about how these tips work for you. In the meantime, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button. I'll be putting out lots of content like this every week. And until next time, I'm Aaron Hunter, and thanks for watching.